All right. You know what? I wanted to do another live stream, guys. I got my second wind, and I don't need that. I need to calm down. I need to wind down. So I thought I'd do another live stream with you guys. Move my microphone a little bit. There we go. I don't need it that. I don't need it that close to me. There we go. All right. Had some dinner. I'm sitting down. I'm also watching Riff Tracks on Pluto TV. So, well, I've noticed a lot of people are reacting to his videos. One of them was the YouTuber that I follow, Arta Kicks. And so I thought, hey, what the hell? I think I might just have to do a reaction to some of his videos too. So why don't we have a live stream reaction to one of the most infamous YouTubers and storytellers of them all. That's right, Mr. Ballen. I'm gonna check him out here, guys. So this is a fairly short one, so we're gonna do a forest so evil it's illegal to enter. This should be interesting. As always, once I'm done here, links to the original videos will be in the description box below. If you want to watch this by yourself, hey, you're not going to hurt my feelings. So, here's hoping you won't mind me reacting to his video. Alright, here we go, guys. You guys ready? Alright, now I am. Without further ado, away we go.
I have to start today's video with a disclaimer. Don't go to Dudleytown, Connecticut. This is not a prank, it's not a stunt, it's not clickbait, it's the truth. I'm confident that at the end of this video, there are going to be people that want to go. Don't do it.
Sounds like Helltown, Ohio.
1, it's illegal to go to Dudleytown, it's private property. And 2, as you'll see in today's video, there is a reason why people abandoned Dudleytown. It is not a safe place for people. But before we get into the story about Dudleytown, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button is playing an intense game of online FIFA, wait until they get the lead and then unplug their Wi-Fi. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
Okay. Ghost Town. Ooh.
It was a bright summer day in 1906, and Dr. William C. Clark and his wife Harriet were driving slowly through a beautiful part of northwestern Connecticut called Litchfield County. Litchfield is a rural, very hilly area with lots of winding country roads, and the Clarks were there to try to scout out an area to build their second home. The couple lived full-time in New York City, where Dr. Clark was an oncologist, which is a cancer doctor, and he was also a professor at the Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons. And while the Clarks' lives were very exciting and fulfilling in the city, they were also very hectic and chaotic, and so the reason they had settled on Litchfield as the place to look for a location for their second home is because it was the total opposite of the city. It was quiet, it was peaceful, it was perfect. And so as this couple from New York City drove along these winding backcountry roads, they eventually reached this beautiful covered wooded bridge, and after they drove across it, they got this view up onto this mountainside off to their right, and high up on this mountain was this huge, shaded, beautiful forest. And they saw there was a road that appeared to kind of spider off and go into these woods. Now, the couple had no idea what was up there, but it was just so beautiful, and they were immediately so drawn to it that they decided they would go check it out and see if maybe there was a spot for their second home in these woods. And so Dr. Clark took the car and he went up this access road, and very quickly, as they began climbing up this hillside, The road became very bumpy and overgrown. It was pretty obvious that not many cars were driving into these woods, and so before they even reached the tree line, Dr. Clark had to pull the car over and park it on the side of the road, and then he and Harriet got out, and then on foot, they continued up towards the forest. And once the couple actually entered the forest, immediately the sunlight faded because the canopy over their heads was so thick, and the air became cool and refreshing. And after walking for only a couple of minutes, the forest, which at first seemed very still and quiet, suddenly became alive. They could hear birds chirping and animals running around and insects buzzing. And then up ahead, they saw there was this field off to the side of the road that was full of all these wild apple trees growing in all different directions. And as they got closer, they saw there was just a deer right in the middle of the apple trees eating apples directly off the branches. And then just past all these apple trees, the couple began passing these huge, beautiful patches of roses and lilacs and bright yellow bitter tansy flowers that lined the road. And then before long, the couple was stepping over these babbling brooks, and off in the distance, they could hear the sound of running water like fresh spring water coming down off the mountain. And then, as the sun did begin to poke through the canopy above them, it almost looked like the forest was sparkling, literally. This forest was sitting on a hillside, and the hillside, which was made up of rock, had mica inside of it. And mica is a kind of mineral that when sunlight hits it, it almost looks like it's shimmering. And of course, there were the owls. As Dr. Clark and his wife walked farther and farther into this beautiful forest, they heard more and more owls hooting off in the distance. And to the Clarks, this made the forest feel enchanted. It was like the owls were personally greeting them. By the time the couple had turned around and begun heading back to their car, they had already made up their mind that they were going to build their second home in that forest. And so, after returning to their home in New York, they promptly put in the paperwork to purchase 1,000 acres inside of that Connecticut forest. And that forest had a name. It was called Dark Entry, and it was named that because it looked like from the outside, the forest was basically dark all the time. There was shade cast on it from mountains nearby, and then also the canopy inside of Dark Entry is exceptionally thick. At one time, there actually had been a town inside of Dark Entry Forest. However, all the people who had lived in that town were now all gone. The only remnants of this town were a couple of crumbling stone walls and a couple of home foundations that were scattered about the Dark Entry forest floor. The Clarks had seen some of these ruins as they walked along this overgrown path through the forest, but they weren't concerned. Instead, they felt like these ruins actually added some charm to the forest. After the land purchase was finalized, Dr. Clark began looking for local builders in Connecticut who could help him build this second home inside of Dark Entry Forest. But no matter how much money he offered these local Connecticut builders, they all said no. Now, none of them gave a straight answer to Dr. Clark about why they were turning him down, so Dr. Clark just kind of assumed that, hey, this project is not huge, it's just one house, and the forest is pretty isolated and hard to get to, and so he thought, probably these builders think it's not worth the effort. But Dr. Clark was not discouraged. He decided he would just build the house himself.
Why do I get the feeling he should have built in another place? He should have built in another place. I mean, forest is beautiful, but sometimes beauty can belie the evil contained within, or the sinister intentions contained within. Yeah. Let's find out, shall we?
After all, he was a very handy, competent guy who had grown up on a farm in New Jersey, and so he knew how to build things. And so, for the next several months, Dr. Clark would travel from New York City to Dark Entry Forest every weekend, and he would build this home. First, he cut down this massive swath of hemlock trees on this one flat patch of his land, and then with all this lumber he had cut down, he built his rustic two-story cabin on this flat part of his land. And then nearby on this hilltop, there was a freshwater spring at the top, and so he laid piping from the spring into his cabin so they could have fresh water. And then at the bottom of this nearby hill was this brook, and Dr. Clark loved just standing and watching this brook because inside of it were all these trout that would dart all around. And so Dr. Clark built a swimming pool with beautiful mossy embankments right up against this brook so he could sit there and watch the fish. By Thanksgiving of that year, the cabin was done, and so Dr. Clark and his wife Harriet, they stayed at the cabin to celebrate the holiday. And as they were sitting in their swimming pool watching the trout and listening to the owls hoot off in the distance, they both agreed that this second home was like their little piece of heaven. So every summer from there on out, and every major holiday that they could manage it, the Clarks would travel to their home in Dark Entry Forest, and they would swim and hike and relax, and they'd watch the leaves on the mountainside turn from green to bright yellows and oranges and reds. It was perfect. That is, until 1918. That summer, the couple was in their second home in the forest when Dr. Clark was suddenly called back to New York to attend to a medical emergency. Harriet was very upset at the prospect of suddenly being left alone in this cabin in the middle of the forest by herself for who knows how many days. And so when she dropped her husband off at the nearby train platform, she made him promise that he would come back soon, and he said he would. And then Dr. Clark got on the train, it took off, and Harriet just stood there with her arms crossed, watching it as it chugged along off into the distance. From his comfortable seat on that train, Dr. Clark had no idea that his wife was about to endure a nightmare while he was gone.
Ooh. That does not sound good. Not good at all.
We've all been there. Your guests are on their way over to your house for your big New Year's Eve party, and right as they pull into your driveway, you realize you've overnogged your smoked chicken gallbladder eggnog. And so with minutes to spare, you leap out of the window, shattering the glass and cutting yourself up badly, and then you jog up to Canada and dive into Baffin Bay, and you jump on top of a narwhal, and after some intense underwater hand-to-flipper combat, you take its horn off its head, and you beat it to death. You take its horn, and then you swim back to land, and you jog back to your house, and you leap in through a different window, shattering the glass. And then after you stand up, you make your way into the kitchen, and you whip up a quick narwhal horn iced soup right as your guests are walking through the front door. Crisis averted, right? Wrong. Smoked chicken gallbladder eggnog and narwhal horn iced soup are both just gross. So your party was doomed either way. But you know what isn't gross? HelloFresh. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal service that delivers actually good-tasting food right to your doorstep. With over 35 recipes available every week, there is something to please everyone. Choose from family-friendly, fit and wholesome, even veggie. Plus, you can easily customize your meals or sides, upgrading your proteins, or even adding a protein to your veggie meal.
Oh, that must be his little boy. Oh, already I love this guy. He's awesome.
If you're going to be traveling this New Year's, HelloFresh can accommodate your schedule. You can change your preferences, delivery day, and your address in just a few clicks. So, if you're ready to stop garnishing your holiday parties with trash food and drink, then sign up for HelloFresh today. To do that, go to HelloFresh.com and use code MrBallen21 for 21 free meals and free shipping. Again, go to HelloFresh.com and use code MrBallen21 for 21 free meals and free shipping. Okay, back to the story.
Ooh, yeah.
When the Clarks bought their 1,000 acres in the Dark Entry Forest, they did virtually no research on the forest or the surrounding area.
Of course.
If they had, they very likely would not have purchased that land. You see, the town that used to be inside of the Dark Entry Forest, that was now just ruins that the Clarks saw when they first walked around inside of the forest, was abandoned for a very specific reason. It was cursed. At least that's what the locals say. And in fact, that was the reason why no builders in the area were willing to go with Dr. Clark into the forest to go build his house. Because they were too scared to go anywhere near the ruins of this cursed town. This town, which was known as Dudleytown, was first settled sometime in the 1740s. At first, it was just a couple of people and a couple of small structures, but pretty quickly, 30 families had moved in, and it was a thriving little town. But as the 1700s came to a close, terrible things began to happen to residents of this town. First, there was the Carter family. They moved to Dudleytown in 1759, and shortly after arriving there, 6 members of their family all died suddenly from cholera. The remaining branch of the Carter family was so grief-stricken from their losses that they left Dudleytown and went to New York, where they resettled. But almost immediately after getting set up there, Native Americans raided their property and massacred them, and the 3 people that survived this massacre were 3 of the kids, and they were all kidnapped and taken away. In 1792, a Dudley resident named Hollister died suddenly. Now, we don't know if he fell off a roof or if he was murdered. No one really knows. But what we can agree on is that his untimely death happened in the home of a man named Tanner. And Tanner, following Hollister's death, suddenly just began obsessively talking about these strange creatures he was seeing out in the woods at night, kind of roaming around the dark entry forest.
Whoa.
And he talked about it all the time, and nobody listened to him. And eventually, Tanner went insane, and his daughter had to care for him for the rest of his life. And while Tanner was slowly losing his mind, his next-door neighbor, named Abel, also began reporting that he was seeing weird creatures roaming around the tree line all around the town. And as Abel continued to report seeing these strange creatures lurking in the shadows, he too slowly went mad and had to be cared for until his death.
Makes you wonder maybe they weren't so crazy after all.
In the early 1800s, a famous Revolutionary War hero, General Herman Swift, who lived in Dudleytown, lost his mind shortly after his wife was struck by lightning. And then in 1813, an unknown epidemic rolled through Dudleytown and killed many of its residents. After that, more and more residents of Dudleytown either died suddenly or died mysteriously, and also more and more residents began coming forward with stories about having seen these strange, shadowy creatures moving around the tree line at night. By about 1900, all the Dudleytown residents had either died or simply just left, abandoning their homes, except for one family, the Brophies. But in quick succession, the Brophy family's sheep all died, then the mother died of tuberculosis, then the 2 sons were accused of theft in a nearby town, and then they just disappeared, leaving one person, John Brophy, the father. But the Brophy family home burned to the ground, and so John, who was overcome with grief, just wandered off into the forest and was never heard from again. At that point, Dudleytown officially became a ghost town. No one lived there. And it was at that point, in 1906, when Dr. Clark and Harriet had their beautiful summer's day walk through the forest and discovered where they wanted to build their second home. So, fast forward back to 1918, and Dr. Clark, he's on his medical emergency leave to New York. It winds up being very quick. He's back on a train within 36 hours, and he pulls into the station right near Dark Entry Forest, and he's expecting to see Harriet waiting on the platform for him. But when the train rolled into the station, she wasn't there. Now, Dr. Clark was not a superstitious person, but for some reason, when he didn't see his wife there, he just felt like something was off. There's no reason she wouldn't have come out here to greet him. I mean, she was worried about being all alone in the cabin, and she knew he was going to be arriving at that moment. And so, feeling a little bit panicked, Dr. Clark left the train station and on foot made his way over to the Dark Entry Forest. And when he got there and began walking on that overgrown road path that led to his house, immediately, as soon as he was within the shade of the trees, he began hearing these owls hooting very loudly off in the distance. Now, normally, the sound of these owls hooting made him feel welcome, but this time he felt scared. He felt like something was wrong up ahead. And so he began jogging through the forest, and it's very dark, and all he can hear is the sound of these owls, and it's getting louder and louder and louder. And then finally he reaches the clearing where his property is. And at this point, it's a cacophony of owls hooting practically right on top of him. And he looks up towards his house up on this hill, and he sees the front door is slightly open. And so now, with his heart racing, wondering what's going on with his wife, Dr. Clark runs up to his front porch. He gets to the door and he flings it open the rest of the way. And then right before he stepped into his house, this sudden high-pitched noise began up on the second floor inside of his house. And it was so startling to Dr. Clark that he just froze where he was. And so suddenly it's so loud from the owls all around him and the woods behind him and whatever this noise is that he just stood there unsure what to do. And so as he's sitting there getting the courage up to go investigate his house, he realizes what this high-pitched noise is. It's the sound of maniacal hysterical, insane laughter coming from the second floor. Sensing his wife had to be in danger, the doctor charged up the nearby steps up to the second floor, and he could tell this laughter, this high-pitched laughter, was coming from the master bedroom. And so he ran down the short hallway, he got in front of the closed door that led into the master bedroom, he slowly opened it up, and there, in the back corner of his room, was his wife. She was on the ground, rolled up in a ball, facing the door. Her hands were clenched in fists, her eyes were open and unblinking, and her mouth was open wider than was humanly possible. And as he's staring at his wife, wondering what's going on, he realizes this insane, high-pitched laughter is coming from his wife. But it doesn't even look like it's coming out of her. Her chest is just heaving, her mouth is staying open, and the laughter is just coming out of her. And so the doctor just stood there watching his wife, who's staring directly at his eyes. And finally, he just got so scared, he turned and he ran. During Dr. Clark's 36 hours he was away in New York, something happened to his wife. We don't know what it was, but it caused her to lose her mind. The only thing she would talk about was the strange creatures she saw out in the forest. By some accounts, Harriet spent the rest of her life in a mental asylum. By other accounts, she went back with Dr. Clark to New York, where she took her life. Today, Dudleytown is not only still abandoned, but it is also illegal to visit. However, people do still sneak into Dudleytown and walk around the ruins, and many of them have reported feeling these pockets of cold air where there shouldn't be cold air, and also some others have said as they've been walking, they've felt phantom hands slap them and push them. Some have said they've taken photographs inside of the Dark Entry Forest near Dudleytown, and they've captured strange, shadowy figures that they couldn't see with their naked eye. The famous paranormal couple, Ed and Lorraine Warren, shot a special series in the 1970s inside of the Dark Entry Forest, and they declared the area around Dudleytown was demonically possessed. So that's going to do it. If you got something out of this episode and you haven't done this already, the next time the like button is playing an intense game of online FIFA, wait until they take the lead and then unplug the Wi-Fi. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. We have a podcast called the Mr. Ballen Podcast that puts out brand new exclusive stories on Monday mornings, and on Thursday mornings, we put out the remastered audio of our best YouTube videos. Again, the podcast is called the Mr. Ballen Podcast, and it is available exclusively on Amazon Music. Consider donating to our charity. It's called the Mr. Ballen Foundation, and it provides support to victims of violent crime as well as their families. Monthly donors to the Mr. Ballen Foundation Honor Them Society will receive free gifts and exclusive invites to special live events. Go to mrballen.foundation and click on Get Involved to join the Honor Them Society today. We have 2 additional YouTube channels, Mr. Ballen Shorts and Mr. Ballen en Espanol. We also post near daily content on Facebook, TikTok, and Snapchat. All of those pages are just called Mr. Ballen. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform and then send me a direct message. My username is just @MrBallen, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. Check out our merch at shopmrballen.com, and if you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, wherever, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.
All right. Wow. Yeah, oh man, that's creepy. That's very creepy. Oh man, that's very creepy. Ooh. All right, I think one more from Mr. Ballen. Matter of fact, I'm gonna go ahead and do just that. You like that? If you want to see more Mr. Ballen, do what I just did, and just click on the bell. There you go. There you go. Oh, so let's look at the website. Okay. Actually, yeah. Why don't we do? Ooh, this was just released a day ago. So why don't we do the newest one? Why don't we watch the newest one? Her Death Touch Baffled Doctors. Ooh. And nobody in the chat, but okay. Let's see what's going on here. Alright, Her Death Touch Baffled Doctors. Out. There you go. Mr. Ballen, storyteller. Go. Like what you've seen so far, guys? There's the subscribe button. There's the bell button. Be sure to hit a like and subscribe. So yeah. Alright. Yeah, let's do the new one. Her Death Touch Baffled Doctor. Ooh.
In 1994, a 31-year-old mother was rushed into an emergency room in California with a severely elevated heart rate, her blood pressure was very low, and she was struggling to breathe. As soon as she arrived, the doctors and nurses in this ER, who were very accustomed to getting patients like her, got right to work. And as they're treating her, one of the doctors noticed something very strange about the patient. But before this doctor could tell the other nurses and doctors about this anomaly, there was this loud thud inside of the trauma room they were inside of. And then before long, there was another thud, and then someone started screaming, and then minutes later, the entire hospital would be evacuated. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, please sneak in to the like button's house and set all of their clocks back 1 hour. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
There we go. Mr. Ballen.
On the night of February 19th, 1994, a man in Southern California called 911 because his girlfriend was struggling to breathe. When the 911 dispatcher picked up this man's call, he was very distraught and asked them to please send an ambulance as fast as you possibly can. But despite how upset this man was on the phone, he was not actually surprised this situation was unfolding. His girlfriend, 31-year-old Gloria Ramirez, had been diagnosed with terminal cervical cancer just 6 weeks earlier, and the doctors had told her that she likely did not have much time left. And, making this even more tragic, Gloria had actually gone into the hospital a few years earlier with symptoms and signs that she likely had cancer, but the doctors missed it. Had they caught it back then, they likely could have saved her. Still, after receiving her very grim diagnosis just a few weeks earlier, Gloria had resolved to fight her cancer as best as she could. After all, she had a lot to lose. Gloria had 2 young kids. She had a boy and a girl who were 9 and 12 years old, respectively. And Gloria absolutely adored them and really devoted her life to them. In the evenings, she would play with them and help them with their homework, and the whole time she'd be cracking jokes to make them laugh and smile. And then even when Gloria was not actively parenting her kids, she was always a very positive presence in their lives. She was optimistic, she was happy, she was upbeat, and oftentimes she could be found wandering around with a big smile on her face, singing a religious hymn to herself. So, when Gloria got this terrible news that she had late-stage cancer, she was obviously terrified and sad, but she was also very determined to find a way to survive because she knew her kids still needed her. Around the time Gloria was diagnosed, her doctors told her she would begin radiation treatment for her cancer at the end of February, so she had a few weeks to wait. And so during this waiting period, Gloria found herself spending a lot of time researching her disease, looking for things she could be doing on her own right now to make herself feel better or even potentially increase the odds of her survival. So, on February 19th, when Gloria told her boyfriend that she was starting to have some issues breathing, the boyfriend didn't hesitate for a second to call 911 because he knew firsthand from living with Gloria that she was desperate to survive, and so any changes in her symptoms needed to be treated like an emergency. It was around 8 p.m. that night when the ambulance pulled up in front of Gloria's home. Paramedics climbed out, they rushed over to Gloria, they put her on a stretcher, they gave her a mask with oxygen, and then they loaded her into the back of the ambulance, and then seconds later they were flying down the road with their sirens blaring. While they sped toward the hospital in Riverside, which is a city about an hour east of Los Angeles, one of the paramedics on board the ambulance called ahead to the Riverside Hospital emergency room to talk to one of the doctors. And the doctor who answered was a 33-year-old woman named Dr. Julie Gorchinsky, and she loved her job. She loved the thrill and excitement and challenge of working in a big city emergency room. And so she takes this call. The paramedics tell her that they have a patient who has terminal cancer, she's having a hard time breathing, and her heart rate is becoming very unstable to the point where if it's not controlled soon, it's going to kill her. And they told Julie they would be there in about 5 minutes. And so Julie, she hangs up the phone and immediately began preparing for receiving a critical patient, as well as getting trauma room 1 ready, which is where Gloria would be treated. Now, as bad as this situation was for Gloria, for Julie and the other nurses and doctors in this emergency room, this was kind of business as usual. They were used to receiving patients that were in very rough shape. And so as Julie and the rest of her medical team waited for this ambulance to arrive, none of them were worried that they wouldn't be able to handle this patient. They thought tonight was going to be as routine as any other night. However, they would be very, very wrong. The ambulance ride took about 15 minutes, so they pulled into the Riverside Hospital right at 8:15 p.m. And as soon as the ambulance came to a stop, the paramedics jumped out, they ran around to the back, they opened up the back doors, they pulled Gloria out still on her stretcher, and they pushed her as fast as they could through the doors into the emergency room. Once inside, Julie and the rest of her team, they took Gloria and they pushed her left down a hallway into trauma room 1. Once inside, the doctors and nurses immediately noticed that Gloria's heart rate was spiking dramatically and her blood pressure was falling dramatically. So Julie and her team began administering a standard set of treatments for someone in this condition. They switched Gloria's oxygen mask she had been using on the ambulance ride for a more powerful one. They gave her painkillers, sedatives, and drugs to help steady her heartbeat. And at first, the treatments seemed to be working because pretty quickly Gloria's heartbeat began to level out. However, it didn't last. Soon, Gloria's heartbeat was racing so insanely fast that all of these alarms were going off on her heartbeat monitor. Knowing they had to act quickly, Julie and her team began removing Gloria's t-shirt in order to administer electric shocks to her chest with paddles. This is a way for doctors to kind of reset a patient's heartbeat. As the nurses got the electric paddles ready, they and the rest of the medical team suddenly noticed two strange things about Gloria. The first was that Gloria seemed to be emitting this strange garlicky smell from her mouth. The second was Gloria's skin looked very greasy. However, despite the entire medical team taking note of these two things, no one thought they were significant. Lots of patients suddenly are brought into the ER, and very rarely do they have a chance to shower or brush their teeth beforehand. And so they figured that was the reason she looked and smelled that way. Finally, the big electrical paddles were ready, and so the nurses placed them on either side of Gloria's heart, and then they began sending powerful bolts of electricity into Gloria's chest. While the nurses worked on Gloria's heart, other members of the medical team needed to assess Gloria's overall condition, and so to do that, they needed to draw her blood. So a nurse took an alcohol wipe and cleaned a small spot on Gloria's arm, and then she took a syringe and jabbed it inside of Gloria and began the draw. And as soon as she did this, trauma room 1 filled with a new smell. It was a chemical smell. And Julie immediately noticed it, and she looked over at the nurse doing the blood draw, and she said, "I think it smells like ammonia in here." And the nurse who was doing the blood draw kind of scrunched her face up in disgust and nodded in agreement. The nurse finished the blood draw and then handed the blood.
Let's do that again. What did he say?
His heart, other members of the medical team needed to assess Gloria's overall condition, and so to do that, they needed to draw her blood. So a nurse took an alcohol wipe and cleaned a small spot on Gloria's arm, and then she took a syringe and jabbed it inside of Gloria and began the draw. And as soon as she did this, Trauma Room 1 filled with a new smell. It was a chemical smell. And Julie immediately noticed it, and she looked over at the nurse doing the blood draw, and she said, "I think it smells like ammonia in here." And the nurse who was doing the blood draw kind of scrunched her face up in disgust and nodded in agreement. The nurse finished the blood draw and then handed the blood vial to Julie. And as Julie was taking this blood vial from the nurse, she noticed the nurse looked suddenly very confused and very disoriented. Her eyes were kind of flickering and she was staring straight ahead like she didn't know where she was. And so Julie, she sees this in the nurse, and then she glances down at this blood vial in her own hand now, and she sees something she's never seen before. The blood inside this vial, Gloria's blood, was full of these small white crystals. But before Julie could tell anybody else in the room about these strange crystals in the patient's blood, the nurse who had done the blood draw went from being dazed and confused to collapsing on the ground. Luckily, another doctor had seen the nurse starting to collapse and dove out and caught her right before her head hit the ground. This collapsed nurse was very quickly placed on a stretcher and wheeled out of Trauma Room 1 so the other doctors and nurses could focus on Gloria, who was obviously dying. And so Julie, who was still just standing in the middle of this room holding this vial of blood, was wondering what the heck just happened to her colleague, and she's also looking down at these crystals thinking, "I've never seen this before, what does this mean?" And right as she was about to flag one of the other medical team members over to look at it, Julie began feeling very nauseous and her head started spinning, and then she felt like she might collapse. And so, not wanting to cause any more distractions for the main team, she quickly placed this vial of blood on a nearby tray, and then she quickly made her way out of Trauma Room 1 and sat down in a nearby chair. And as soon as she sat down, another staff member at the hospital who had not been inside of the trauma room ran over to Julie and asked her, "Hey, are you okay?" And Julie, she looked up at the staff member and she tried to speak, but she couldn't. And then her eyes rolled back into her skull and she slumped forward and fell to the ground. And at the same moment that Julie was collapsing outside of Trauma Room 1, inside of the trauma room, there was another thud as another nurse collapsed, and then another, and then another. And before long, screams were coming out of Trauma Room 1 as people inside who had not collapsed yet are looking around, seeing their colleagues just dropping like flies for no reason. And so pretty quickly, the call came out over the hospital intercom to evacuate the hospital. The only people that would stay back would be a skeleton crew of doctors and nurses and Gloria, because they felt like moving Gloria outside right now would likely kill her. We need to save her right now. Outside the hospital, the parking lot very quickly filled up with doctors and nurses and other sick people on stretchers. People were screaming and crying, sirens were blaring, and the medical staff that was still healthy was running all over the place looking for supplies to help treat their coworkers. Meanwhile, back inside of Trauma Room 1, things for Gloria only seemed to be getting worse.
This is nuts. This is nuts, guys. My God.
The 4 doctors and nurses who had stayed back continued to administer more drugs, more shocks to her chest, more oxygen, but no matter what they did, her blood pressure continued to fall and her heartbeat became fainter and fainter and fainter. Finally, at 8:50 p.m., roughly 35 minutes after Gloria had first been wheeled into the emergency room, she died. In that 35-minute window, 23 of Riverside Hospital staff had either collapsed or become very sick and then collapsed, and many of them had to be hospitalized. But the most affected person by far was Julie. She was in such bad shape by the time she made it out to the parking lot that she was actually put on an ambulance from her hospital and driven to another hospital where she was admitted to their intensive care unit. And there, a nurse drew her blood, and in it were little white crystals just like in Gloria's blood. At 11 p.m. on the
Whoa.
same night all this craziness happened, a hazardous materials team dressed in full hazmat suits entered the Riverside Hospital to look for a chemical leak, because that was the running theory that some sort of leak had happened in the hospital, it had made its way into Trauma Room 1, and that's what had caused everyone to collapse and get sick. But despite an extensive search, the hazmat team did not find any leaks. Stumped, authorities decided to just be extra careful around this hospital and around Gloria's body until they figured out what had happened, because the fear was there was some sort of unknown or hidden toxin either in this building or on or in Gloria's body. 6 days after the incident, inside of a special airtight room, while wearing full body protective suits, doctors performed an autopsy on Gloria. And they discovered there was absolutely nothing toxic inside of her. In fact, the autopsy only revealed that Gloria had died of natural causes. Her cancer had caused her heart and her kidneys to fail.
Yo, what is going on here? This story is nuts. Oh my gosh. Oh no, well, I guess we're gonna... Let's find out, shall we?
Meanwhile, although the other medical staff members who had gotten sick inside of Trauma Room 1 had mostly recovered, Julie just could not seem to get any better. She had breathing problems and pancreatitis, which is the inflammation of the pancreas, and it's very painful. And her bones were literally just starting to die, leaving her in a wheelchair.
Oh my
Gloria's family
gosh.
blamed Riverside Hospital for Gloria's death, insisting that these toxic fumes that must have been present inside of Trauma Room 1 came from the hospital, and those fumes are responsible for what happened to the staff, and they are responsible for killing Gloria.
I don't think so. Somehow I don't think so. There's something weird going on here, guys.
And in fact, 3 times in the 3 years leading up to Gloria's death, Riverside Hospital had had some issues with hazardous materials making their way into the hospital. There was sewer gas that came in from a drain. There was a toxic gas that was created from a sterilizer that made 2 people in the hospital sick. And some of the hospital's water was found to have algae in it. But the hospital said they checked their hospital, there was no leak, we did not cause whatever toxic fumes were inside of Trauma Room 1, and so we are not responsible for what happened to our staff or what happened to Gloria. Riverside Hospital would be searched again and again for some sort of leak. Also, Gloria's home would be searched for toxic gases, and Gloria would be autopsied 2 additional times. But no one could find anything toxic anywhere. So eventually, California's Department of Human and Health Services came forward and said they had the answer to what had happened inside of Trauma Room 1. They said it was mass sociogenic illness. Mass sociogenic illness is when a group of people all believe they have the same illness, even though there's nothing wrong with any of them. It's caused by fear and anxiety. Basically, the state of California was saying that Julie and the other 22 staff members who had gotten sick and collapsed had just pretended. They were making it up. As for Gloria, they said she just died from her cancer. Now, of course, this explanation made a lot of people unhappy, like Gloria's family, and of course Julie, whose medical problems were very well documented. She couldn't walk anymore because her bones were literally dying. And so Gloria's family and Julie said, you know what, we think the hospital is covering something up and we are going to sue. But before they did, an obscure lab located just outside of San Francisco, California, it was called the Forensic Science Center, was called in to do yet another investigation into what happened inside of Riverside Hospital. And what these scientists found would make history. Here is what they discovered. After Gloria was diagnosed with cancer, she began researching not only her disease, but also alternative treatments that she could do on her own before she began her radiation treatment at the end of February. And according to the scientists of Forensic Science Center, Gloria must have begun using a well-known controversial home remedy to help with her pain. It was called dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO for short. In the 1960s, DMSO was prescribed to treat pain and anxiety, but as it became more popular, it was discovered that it could cause eye damage, and so the government said, you can't use this anymore. But even though DMSO was no longer available as a medicine, it was still being sold in gel form inside of hardware stores as a heavy-duty degreaser. And it was this type of DMSO, the gel form, that Gloria had begun rubbing all over her skin, head to toe. This was the reason when she arrived in the emergency room, her skin looked greasy because she was literally covered head to toe in this gel. It was also why her breath smelled like garlic. Because after DMSO is absorbed into your bloodstream, you emit a sort of garlicky smell both through your pores and out of your mouth. But the discovery that Gloria had been using DMSO did not account for why all these people in the hospital began collapsing and falling ill when they were around her. It turned out on the night that Gloria's boyfriend called 911 because Gloria was suffering from breathing problems, Gloria was also suffering from another medical issue, but it was so minor, the boyfriend didn't think to bring it up to the 911 dispatcher or to the paramedics when they arrived. And this secret medical condition that Gloria had was a urinary tract infection, which is an infection in any part of the urinary system. These are very common and usually very easy to treat. But what nobody realized was that because Gloria had this infection, her body was not flushing out the DMSO chemicals that had seeped inside of it from all this gel on her skin. Still, even very large amounts of DMSO chemicals inside of your body or on your skin is not enough to cause any harm to you or people around you. The danger started when the EMTs in the ambulance put that oxygen mask on Gloria's face as they transported her to the hospital. Suddenly, there was this new chemical being introduced into Gloria's body, oxygen. And the scientists from the Forensic Science Center said this new chemical, oxygen, began interacting with the DMSO chemicals trapped inside of Gloria's body, and together they formed a new chemical. Now, if Gloria had gotten to the hospital and responded more positively to the treatments and medicines that the doctors and nurses at the ER gave her, then Julie and the rest of the staff inside of that hospital would never have gotten sick. For that to happen, for that catastrophe to play out inside of that hospital, two very specific things had to happen in the correct order. And they did. First, there was the electric shocks. When the medical team was pumping electrical shocks into Gloria's chest, the scientists from the Forensic Science Center say those charges of electricity interacted with that new chemical that had been created inside of Gloria, and it changed this new chemical again. And this time, the change made the chemical deadly. It became what's known as dimethyl sulfate, which was used as a chemical weapon in World War I. Once Gloria received those shocks to her chest, her body basically became a canister of nerve gas. And then one of the nurses drew Gloria's blood, which was the second event that ultimately set off the catastrophe. Emergency rooms are typically kept fairly cold, roughly 66 degrees Fahrenheit. But when this new deadly chemical was created inside of Gloria, it was still inside of her body where it was warm. And for dimethyl sulfate, when it is warm, it's unstable and much less dangerous. But when that nurse drew Gloria's blood, inside of the blood was the deadly chemical, and now it was no longer in Gloria, it was in this cool 66-degree room, and so it began to stabilize and started producing those little white crystals inside of the blood vial that Julie saw, and as it stabilized, it turned into a gas, and it filled the room, and the staff began to breathe it in. The scientists from the Forensic Science Center do not think that this mass poisoning event contributed to Gloria's death, meaning Gloria did really die from her cancer. Gloria's family has denied that Gloria ever used DMSO, and they still insist that the hospital was responsible for Gloria's death. The hospital would ultimately pay $800,000 in settlement money to Gloria's family, but the hospital would never admit that they did anything wrong. Julie's lawsuit against the hospital was ultimately dismissed, and her bones never really recovered from the damage that was done to them, despite 8 surgeries to try to fix them. However, Julie would eventually go back to being a practicing doctor at another hospital, and she has said the ordeal she went through inside of Trauma Room 1 at Riverside Hospital actually made her a better doctor.
And there you go. Oh man, that was insane, guys. That is. This goes to show you, don't go messing around with stuff. Oh my god.
So that's going to do it. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please sneak into the like button's house and set all of their clocks back 1 hour. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. We have a podcast called the Mr. Ballen Podcast that puts out brand new podcast exclusive stories on Monday mornings, and on Thursday mornings, we put up remastered audio of our best YouTube videos. Again, it's just called the Mr. Ballen Podcast, and it's available exclusively on Amazon Music. Consider donating to our charity. It's called the Mr. Ballen Foundation, and it provides support to victims of violent crime as well as their families. Monthly donors to the Mr. Ballen Foundation Honor Them Society will receive free gifts and exclusive invites to special live events. Go to mrballen.foundation and click on Get Involved to join the Honor Them Society today. We have 2 additional YouTube channels, Mr. Ballen Shorts and Mr. Ballen en Espanol. We post near daily content on TikTok, Facebook, and Snapchat. All of those pages are just called Mr. Ballen. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform and then send me a direct message. My username is just @Mr. Ballen, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. Check out our merch at shopmrballen.com, and if you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballen. It's linked in the description below. So, whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, wherever, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.
Wow, guys. Like I said, I guess that's a good lesson. Don't go messing with stuff you're not sure of. Oh man. Oh my gosh. Well, regardless of what the family might think, it makes sense. It does make sense. I mean, I know I'm not a doctor. I know I'm not a medicine practitioner or anything like that, or a pharmacist, but it makes sense. Oh my gosh. Oh man. Well, I'm gonna see if we've got anybody in chat. No, we have nobody in chat. Well, hang on, guys. I'll be right back. I think my dad was trying to tell me something. Let me turn my camera off for just a few minutes so you guys don't see anything you're not supposed to say. And I'll be right back. Hmm. Hmm. Okay, guys, I'm back. All he was saying was, don't forget your symphony bar. I almost forgot about it. I'll tell you what. I like Hershey. I like Hershey's, but I think I like their symphony bars the best, especially this one. This is the creamy milk chocolate. And it is so good. I probably don't need it, but that's okay. I'll be throughout my tri-semester in college. I'll be exercising more, and I'll be burning the fat off. So something I've been needing to do anyway. So all right. But anyway, now what you guys think of that? That was pretty good. I'll tell you what, I can see why a lot of people react to Mr. Ballen. He's a good storyteller. Let's see. Um, let's see. Let's go back to his story. We might just do a triple feature, Mr. Ballen. Hmm. Right. Why don't we just do this one? This hospital has a disturbing secret. All right, you guys ready? I know I am, so without further ado, away we go.
In 2015, a startling discovery was made inside of this off-limits area inside of a prominent South African hospital. Now, at the time, no one really understood what this discovery meant, and so eventually people just kind of forgot about it and moved on. Until 2 years later, when another eerily similar discovery was made inside of another prominent South African hospital in one of their off-limits areas. I can't believe this story has not gotten more press because one, it's recent, and two, the implications of these discoveries are mind-boggling. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week.
Well, probably one of the reasons why it hasn't caught more popularity is because of the African government. They want to keep stuff like that hush-hush.
So, if that's of interest to you, please put coyote urine in the like button's apple juice. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
Okay.
On October 4th, 2017, a 61-year-old father of 6 named Tatike Katsai arrived at a hospital in Stellenbosch, which is one of the richest towns in South Africa. Tatike, who lived in the area with his family, had been dealing with some stomach issues over the last several months, and so this day he was finally going in to have abdominal surgery to hopefully alleviate those issues. So, after entering the building, Tatike was checked in, and then before long he was transferred to the operating room where surgeons got to work on him. After the surgery was over, Tatike was transferred to a recovery room in the hospital where he was scheduled to stay for at least a couple of days so the doctors and nurses could watch over him while he recovered and make sure there was no complications from the procedure. And so, on the afternoon of October 4th, Tatike just kind of lounged around inside of his recovery room. He couldn't really do anything because of the incisions on his stomach, and so he mostly just laid in his bed, he watched TV, he relaxed, he ate, and then at some point, some of his family members came into the hospital and they visited with him as well. By the end of that day, the day of his surgery, Tatike was definitely sore from the incisions, but overall, he was in good spirits, and to the medical staff, it seemed very likely that his surgery was a success. Early the next morning, at around 5:15 a.m., one of the nurses in the hospital went to Tatike's room to check on him. And when she went inside, Tatike was awake, he was alert, he seemed totally normal. And so after a brief conversation, the nurse told Tatike that she was just going to get him some fresh linens to make up his bed. And so Tatike nodded a thank you to her, and then the nurse, she turned away from Tatike, who's in his bed. She stepped out of the one door in the room into the hallway. She grabbed fresh linens off of a cart, and then she turned back around and went back into Tatike's room, except now Tatike was not in his bed. So the nurse immediately thought, okay, well then Tatike must have gone into his bathroom because the door was shut. He must be in the bathroom. And so just kind of reflexively, the nurse walked over to Tatike's now empty bed and replaced the linens. And then when she was done, she just looked at the bathroom door inside of his room, expecting Tatike to come outside any minute. But after a couple of minutes passed and Tatike had still not come out of the bathroom, the nurse decided to go over and just knock. And so she walked over, she knocked on the bathroom door and just kind of called out, hey, is everything okay in there? But there was no answer. And so the nurse eventually just tried the handle, and when she saw it was open, she called out that she was coming inside. She opened up the bathroom door, and it was empty. And so the nurse, she whipped her head around and looked back out at the room where Tatike should have been, and she saw, he's not on the bed, he's not under the bed, he's not anywhere in this room. Where could he have possibly gone? And she's thinking to herself, the only door out of this room is into the hallway, the same door that she had used to go out and get the linens. And if somehow Tatike had ran out of that door in the few seconds that her back was turned from Tatike, she certainly would have heard him or seen him. Because again, she was right outside the door and only outside of his room for a couple of seconds. Not to mention the fact, Tatike has major incisions on his stomach and could barely stand, let alone walk or run. And so totally baffled, this nurse ultimately left the room and went and told her superiors.
Something wrong here.
Thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. In 2017, I left the military and pretty much right away, I fell apart. The military had provided a lot of structure in my life, and so suddenly not having that structure made me feel like I was lost. Pretty soon, I began resenting all the people around me just because they seemed happy and I wasn't. I sort of figured that these feelings of resentment and unhappiness would just kind of go away on their own, but they didn't. Eventually, with some encouragement from my family and my friends, I sought out a therapist. And quickly, my therapist diagnosed me with depression, something I really did not think I was. But after the shock of the diagnosis had worn off, me and my therapist were able to kind of go back in my life and figure out what was causing me to feel the way I was feeling. And before long, having that perspective really made me feel a lot better. Look, therapy is not for everyone, but it is a great starting point for people who just kind of feel lost and don't really know where to go. And so if that's you, I would highly suggest you give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is the world's largest therapy service, and it's 100% online. Get matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey, and then you can communicate with your therapist however you feel comfortable, whether that's text messaging, phone call, video call, chat, whatever you want. You can also switch therapists at any time for free. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/Mr. Ballen. I've also linked them in the description below. This hospital would immediately begin looking for Tatike on the grounds of the hospital, but they would do it kind of quietly. They wouldn't call Tatike's family to tell them that, hey, we can't find him, nor would they call police. And some have speculated that either one, the hospital did not think this was an emergency and they would quickly find Tatike and that everything would be fine, or two, the hospital was just so embarrassed at the idea that they lost a patient, they didn't want anyone to know. And so,
well, they should have treated this seriously. They should have taken it like a serious incident, and they should have informed the police, and they should have informed Tatike's family.
That's why they didn't tell anyone. Regardless, the hospital would search for Tatike all day on the 5th, the day he went missing,
and they couldn't
find him. And then the next day, the 6th, the hospital again would spend the entire day quietly searching everywhere in the hospital, but they wouldn't find him again. And so finally on the next day, the 7th, so 48 hours after Tatike had just kind of vanished inside of his room, the hospital would reach out to Tatike's family and they would say to them, hey, is Tatike home with you guys? And the family was like, No, he's supposed to be with you. And so the hospital would say, well, he left 2 days ago, so we don't know where he is. And so Tatike's family is horrified, not only that they were totally left in the dark, but they would find out over the course of this conversation that the hospital had not even contacted the police yet. And so the family, they reached out to the police, and then later that day, the family would meet the police at the Stellenbosch hospital, and then a very public search of the property would ensue to look for Tatike. However, again, no one could find him. Authorities would continue to search both the hospital and also the neighboring area outside of the hospital over the next couple of days. But after they continued to find absolutely nothing, the search began to wind down. And so Tatike's devastated family was left with absolutely no idea what to think or what to do. Fast forward to October 20th, so 15 days after Tatike had gone missing. And on this day, the 20th, there was a construction crew at this hospital in Stellenbosch doing some renovations. And at some point on this day, one of the workers had to climb into the ceiling of one of the floors of this hospital. Now, the space above the ceiling is this tight, cramped space, almost like an attic. It's very big and wide. It's like the whole length of that floor. And really the only people that would ever go into the ceiling are construction workers or other authorized personnel that needed to do work. It's not a place that the public would ever go into. But when one of these workers went up into the ceiling, he had a headlamp on and he's kind of looking around. He's looking for what he needs to do up there. And at some point he turns his head and his light illuminates a person sitting in the corner far away from him, way up against the side in this tiny little attic space. And it would turn out it was Tatike, and he was deceased. The hospital had absolutely no clue how Tatike could have gotten up there. Not only is it obviously not a publicly accessible area, but the actual way to get up into the ceiling, the door that leads up into the ceiling, is very difficult to find. And even if Tatike found this entrance into the ceiling, it would have been nearly impossible for him to actually get into the ceiling. Because again, this guy has serious incisions on his stomach from the surgery he got. He could barely sit up. He couldn't really walk. So the idea of him climbing and pulling himself up into the ceiling just seems impossible. Then there was the very strange autopsy results. Now, the full report has not been made public, but Tatike's family had a consultation with the hospital after the autopsy was complete, and they would go to reporters and talk about what the hospital told them. And apparently, the hospital told the family that Tatike did not die from complications from his surgery, and they heavily insinuated that Tatike did not die from natural causes. Something happened to him, and the hospital had no idea what this something was, and that's what killed him. And the hospital also told the family that Tatike likely was dead before he went up into the ceiling. Meaning someone or something killed Tatike, and then someone or something placed him in the ceiling. Again, this is just from the family going to reporters and talking about their discussion with the hospital. The hospital's only official statement has basically been that they have cooperated with the family and they don't really know what happened to Tatike. Now, of course, this is a very strange story, but it gets even weirder. On May 10th, 2019, so about a year and a half after Tatike was found deceased in the Stellenbosch hospital ceiling, a 53-year-old father of 4 named Sandile Sabia arrived at another hospital in South Africa. It was in a city called Durban, which is considered to be one of the nicest and wealthiest places in South Africa, similar to Stellenbosch. Sandile was a builder, and he had been working on a house when he had fallen and broken his leg. Specifically, he broke his femur bone, the bone that runs from your hip down to your knee, the big single bone in your thigh. So just for reference, if you break your femur, you can't walk. So, with some assistance from friends and family, Sandile hobbled his way into this hospital in Durban, and he began to receive care. 2 days later, on May 17th, Sandile was still in the hospital, still recovering from this broken femur, when his cousin came to visit him. The cousin said Sandile seemed totally normal, and that during this visit, Sandile told the cousin that after the cousin left, Sandile was going to be transported from this hospital to another hospital nearby, where he was going to get an x-ray of his leg, as well as talk to another orthopedic surgeon. But apparently, after this cousin left from this visit, the doctors at the Durban hospital walked into Sandeal's room to take him and transport him to this other hospital, and Sandeal was not in his room. Now, this hospital in Durban was known for their very tight security, and so right away, their reaction was very different than the Stellenbosch hospital's reaction. This hospital immediately contacted authorities and said, "We are missing a patient," and they began a very public search of their hospital for Sandeal. But they couldn't find him. On May 18th, so 6 days after Sandeal disappeared, the hospital in Durban began to smell this horrible stench coming from one wing of their hospital. And so hospital workers would track the stench to a janitor's closet, and when they opened it up, they saw this black liquid dripping out of the ceiling, and the liquid was coming from Sandeal's decomposing body that was located in the ceiling. Sandeal's autopsy would be carried out very quickly. However, the results of that autopsy have never been made public, and Sandeal's family has not commented on the results of this autopsy. As of today, all we know is that within a 2-year period, 2 seemingly ordinary South African men, who both could either not walk at all or who could barely walk because of their physical injuries, somehow snuck out of their hospital rooms totally undetected by staff, and then wound up dead in the hospital ceiling. Some say the men really did somehow sneak out of their own accord and decided to go into the ceiling, and that's what happened. Others say both men were murdered and then placed into the ceiling, and still others think these 2 cases are the best examples of something called spontaneous teleportation, which is the hypothetical phenomenon where a human suddenly disappears and then almost instantaneously reappears in another location. But for now, there is no official explanation, so those are all just theories. And so it's up to you to decide what you believe.
Oh my gosh.
So that's going to do it. If you got something out of today's story and you haven't done this already, please put coyote urine in the like button's apple juice. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. We have a podcast called the Mr. Ballen Podcast that puts out brand new podcast exclusive stories on Monday mornings, and on Thursday mornings, we upload remastered audio of our best YouTube videos. Again, it's called the Mr. Ballen Podcast, and it is available exclusively on Amazon Music. Consider donating to our charity called the Mr. Ballen Foundation. It provides support to victims of violent crime as well as their families. Monthly donors to the Mr. Ballen Foundation Honor Them Society will receive free gifts and exclusive invites to special live events. Go to mrballen.foundation and click on Get Involved to join the Honor Them Society today. We have 2 additional YouTube channels. One is called Mr. Ballen Shorts. The other is called Mr. Ballen en Espanol. We post near daily content on Facebook, Snapchat, and TikTok. All of those pages are just called Mr. Ballen. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform and then send me a direct message. My username is @MrBallen, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. Check out our merch at shopmrballen.com, and if you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, wherever, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.
Wow, that just took a full 180. Whoa. That is just... wow. That is just freaky, guys. Spontaneous human teleportation. I think... I don't know. I think you got a homicidal maniac who enjoys killing people and then drags them up into the attic to forget about him. This person might have been an employee of the first hospital and not to get attention fixed on them, they decide to move, and coincidence enough, they came to the other hospital. That sounds more like it. That sounds more like it. Now, that's just my opinion. There's some strange shit out there, guys. Don't just, just because it seems strange, don't just, don't just push it away. Just don't just go, yeah, it's BS. I don't believe it. There's a lot of weird stuff out there. There's a lot of weird things that happen out there, and a lot of them cannot be explained. They can't. Wow. Okay, guys. Well, that's a triple shot of Mr. Ballen. I think that's, yeah. I'm gonna have to get it cleaned up in a little bit, and I'm gonna have to get to bed. So, guys, like this, if you want to see more of this, leave a comment. Now, if you like what you see on Mr. Ballen, leave a like and subscribe on his channel. Now, if you like what you see on my channel, please leave a like and subscribe to mine. I would appreciate it. Until then, that's going to do it. Now, I know I said that, and then I had another, decided to do another live stream. But, and oh man, it's 37 outside. Dang. 37. Well, those of you who are experiencing that type of weather, or even colder weather, hey, my advice to you, stay warm, stay safe, and you guys stay awesome, okay? And I'll see you in the next video. You may not hear from me for a while at certain times. That's because, I'm back in college, so it might be a little difficult at times, but I will try and do some stuff every once in a while. I said I was going to try and do some Shadow Someone's Garage reviews during the Christmas and New Year's holiday. I didn't get around to doing that because I had some other things I needed to do. But rest assured, I haven't forgotten that channel, and you'll see some more. Stuff appearing on Shadow Someone's Garage pretty soon. All right. Okay, guys, that's going to do it for me for right now. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. I will, once this has, oh, shut up, North. I am so going to install that piece of shit virus security. It's nothing but crap. That's going to do it for me for right now. Like I said, I will do some more later on. Like I said, you guys stay safe, you guys stay cool, or you guys stay warm, you guys stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay. Good night, guys.